This is March 11th, 1985. I'm Joe Todd. This is an interview with Mr. E.D. Wallace. Mr. Wallace, where were you born?
Kentucky,
And when's your birthday?
May 24.
What year?
What would you guess?
Oh, I'd say about 99 or 1900.
96.
96.
No, 96 or 95. Yeah, May 24.
1896. Who was your father?
S.L. Wallace.
S.L. Wallace. And who was your mother?
My mother was Lily Ann Lowe.
Lowell?
L-O-W.
Were they both from Kentucky?
Yes, one of them was my father's from Falmouth, F-A-L-M-O-U-2-H. My mother from Carter County.
What kind of work did your father do?
Well, he ran transfer line. Well, in the early days, he was labored around livery stables and so forth when we had horse and buggy days, you know. Later years where he farmed.
Did you work on the farm?
No.
Did you help your father run the livery stable?
I wasn't quite old enough. Well, I did slight work, little work, not much, because I wasn't. When he was working out in the stable, he was a hired man.
What was the name of the livery stable?
The Blue Front Livery Stable in Tallulah, Oklahoma, County seat of Dewey County.
When did you come to Oklahoma?
1899.
1899. How'd you come on? Did you come on the train?
Well, no, a plane? No, yes, I didn't come on a plane. No, I have very small knowledge. See, I was 3 years old. And my first experience in Oklahoma or elsewhere was up in Dewey County, Oklahoma.
How come your folks went to Dewey County?
I have no idea, personally.
And it was the Blue Front
Livery Stable.
Livery Stable in Tallulah.
Yeah, my father was working for them. He started out to farm, but he didn't stay there. He moved to town and did labor.
Who owned that livery stable, the Blue Front?
Well, when he was there originally, it was owned by two brothers, Tom and Will Black.
How big was Tallulah in those years?
Oh, years, I would say maybe 500. Doubt it would be 500 at that time.
Can you give a description of what Tallulah looked like, what the main street looked like at that time?
The main street?
Yeah.
Well, not to do it any good. See, I was about 6, 7. I left there when I was 7 years old. So it was like the ordinary small country towns in that time, see, about 1903 or 4. Yeah. It's a county seat of Dewey County.
Who were some of the prominent people in Tallulah at that
Prominent
time?
people?
Yeah, that you remember?
Well, there's W.H. Reed and his son.
Who was the sheriff? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Reed ran a store and funeral home. That time, I left there, and then later years, the father passed away, and the son Will continued to labor.
Was Tallulah part of the area opened up by the run of 93?
Well, I would suggest yes. It evidently was because it was the county seat town. And they still, at this time, there's having a squabble up there now about trying to move the county seat from Sealing, from Tallulah to Sealing. But I think it's just about blown over now.
Did you know Amos Chapman? Amos Chapman?
Yes.
What was he like? What kind of man was he?
Well, Amos was Gee, I hadn't been so long, I thought of him as Charity, but I knew him as a baseball player. He was the Indian, wasn't he?
Did he ever talk about winning the Medal of Honor?
Did he?
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't old enough to comprehend what he meant, and wouldn't have been at that point.
Yeah. He knew he won the Medal of Honor.
Well, he was entitled to that.
Yeah.
I remember he's quite athletic.
I understand that there was an outlaw named, is it Red Buck? Did you know him?
No, didn't know him personally. I've heard a lot about his history and know people who did know him. Yeah.
What about the Indians around that area? Did you know any of the Indians?
Oh, yes. They were quite friendly.
Who were some of them that you knew?
Oh, sir.
Who were some of the Indians that you were acquainted with around
Well,
there?
at that time, I didn't know many of them. But the main Indian at that day, as far as I was concerned, was Walking Stone.
Walking Stone?
Walking Stone.
Was he Cheyenne?
Well, evidently, let's see, we have Cheyennes and what's the other one? They see these figures are coming here way up in for 1905, 1906. Because I left up there in 1906.
You did? Where'd you go in 1906?
Went south to Clinton.
You moved to Clinton in 1906. How come you moved to Clinton?
32 miles.
I mean, why did you move to Clinton?
Sure.
Why did your family move to Clinton?
Well, my father moved down there. And I don't know just exactly. But he went down there. I'm trying to think what he was. I guess he was still, I'm sure it was, he was still working around the livery stable and feed barn and those.
In the livery stable business, what do you do in a livery stable?
He
What
ran
did
the
you-
livery stable on the horses and the buggies and this stuff, so, and the people would come and hire the buggy, horses and so forth, and drive them and come bring them back.
Was there a wagon yard connected with the livery stable?
Generally, yes.
Now, what is a wagon yard?
Wagon yard is where farmers or freighters say. Now, the first part of your inquiry there was in Tologa, county seat of Dewey County. We're now in Custer County.
Okay.
It's 32 miles from Tologa to Custer City. Okay. Custer City was way ahead. And these people from up in Putnam, that's a little country town, 14 miles from Custer. And there was a number, say 6 or 7 towns out in that area that had all of the freight to come into Custer City. And they'd come in there with their freighters and haul that out. It was a 2-day drive for a heavy loaded freighter. It was a day's drive to Putnam, a little town. From Tologa's 18 miles, 14 miles from that or to Custer. And they'd make the round trip in a couple of days.
Would they stay at the wagon yard?
Oh, yes.
Now, what does a wagon yard look like?
Well, the one my father owned at Putnam was buildings shaped like this building here. That one.
Kind of a,
Down through the middle. Well, this was a livery barn, or feed barn, according to your diagram.
kind of in a U shape or a,
No, they were generally in square.
in a square?
Yeah, see, in other words, you have stalls on that side, stalls on this side. You drive down the middle, see.
Okay.
See, you have rooms over there, you have rooms over here.
You have stalls on each side then?
Yes.
Yeah.
See, it'd be just the same in their structure. And some of them would be as maybe almost around the block.
Now, where do the people stay in the wagon yard?
Well, they stayed, a lot of them stayed in their own wagons. And then most wagon yards had what they call it, couple of little places, but, well, they equipped that you could sleep in there. Build a bunch of bunks up like this, you know.
Oh, a bunkhouse type?
Yeah, that's it, that's what it was, a bunkhouse.
How much did it cost to spend the night in the wagon yard?
I don't recall.
Now, did you go by rail from Tologa to Clinton?
No, Custer. Custer City is what I'm talking about.
Oh, did you go by rail or by wagon?
We went by wagon, got in that before. But we still going that way. There's no railroad up in that country, and we don't expect any anymore.
How long did it take to go from Tologa to Custer City?
Well, if you're driving a horse and buggy, driving buggy, let's see. I've forgotten what they used to call it, how many hours it made today. But you wouldn't get 10 miles an hour. Not that far, 7 or 8 miles.
Well, it was a good day's trip then?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and see, we had, at that time, we had mail route, U.S. mail route. One went opposite, and it was full-day drive with you. Now, that's not a rural route, that is a direct U.S. mail.
Did the mail go by wagon?
Well, yes, it went by.
Where did you start the school?
We're that in Custer City.
Was the school in town?
Yeah.
How big was the school?
How big was it then?
Yes, sir.
Oh, it was 2-story. No, where I started the school,
Yes, sir.
I started school in Tologa, County, Dudley County. And it was, at the time I started, it was, well, just a very average brick building. And they didn't have a lot of the things that we have, the kids have today.
How many students were in that school?
Sir?
How many students were
I
in
have
that
no
school?
idea. I don't know.
Yeah. What was the name of it?
It was at the city school at Tologa, Oklahoma.
Who did they name Tologa after?
I have no idea.
How big was the school in Custer City?
Well, let's see, when I went there in 1906, they had this 2-story building. I think there's 4 rooms up and 4 rooms down. Very common 2-story building.
Yeah. How many students were there?
I have no idea. I expect it possibly, see, they were consolidated with some country schools. And they brought those country children in there. I would say there might have been about 200 at that time when I went there.
Do you remember Statehood Day?
Oh, yes.
Tell me about that day.
I can't do it. I don't remember enough of it. No.
Was there a big celebration at school?
In school, no. See, I had moved away from that before. See, statehood was 1907.
Right.
Yeah. Well, 1907, I'd still lived there, but I moved back the other way. Back up to the little town of Putnam, which is between Tologa and Custer City.
How big was Putnam?
Putnam. Well, I had been in Putnam for several years, but it was possibly 150 people there. I could have crowded it today now. It was built on a crossroad, in a sense now where I mean a crossroad, east, west, north, south. But that didn't mean anything at all.
What county is Putnam in?
Huh?
What county is Putnam in?
What?
What county?
Dewey County.
Dewey County. How come the family moved to Putnam?
I don't know. I really don't know why, but they moved there.
How far did you go through school and how many years?
I finished high school in Custer City.
In Custer City. What year did you graduate?
Sir?
What year did you graduate from?
15.
1915.
Yeah, 15.
After high school, what did you do?
High school, I finished high school.
What did you do after high school?
What year did I say that?
1915.
That's when I finished high school.
What did you do after that?
I went to railroad.
Where?
I went to work for my father on transfer line for about a year and a half, and then I went to work for railroad.
Now, what's a transfer line?
Well, that's the man that hauls the freight from the depot up to town. That's, in other words, we call them dray lines, he used to call them something.
Now, was that in Custer City? What kind of freight would you haul?
Anything that came in. We didn't have any trucks or anything like that. See.
On the dray wagon, did your father have horses or mules?
Sir?
On the dray wagon, did your father have horses or mules?
Now you couldn't get a mule on my father's place. It had to be horses.
How come your father didn't like mules?
Don't ask me. He and a mule just don't. Me.
In 1917, when you went to work for the railroad, what did you do?
Truck freight.
Truck freight. And where?
There on the dock.
There in Custer City?
Yeah.
Now, was it a hand truck? How long did you do that?
Well, I did that. Let's see. In 1917, I said, didn't I?
Yes, sir.
But I did that. I went to the Army. I tried to get in the Army to turn it down. It wasn't big enough. And then I finally did go to the Army. And I was turned down July the 1st, July the 4th on 17. And it wasn't big enough. And then I finally was drafted.
When were you drafted?
May the 25th, 1917.
Where'd you go for your basic training?
Sir?
Where did you go for your basic training?
Camp Cody, New Mexico, with the 1st Minnesota Infantry.
What part of New Mexico is that?
Right in southwest part.
Describe basic training.
Sir?
Describe basic training. What was it like?
Well, it just, you call you in the morning and you drill all day. And that's it.
What time was reveille?
I don't recall.
What kind of drills did you have?
Huh?
What kind of drills?
Most of it was just manual training, the use of the guns and so forth, and lots of hiking in order to get efficiency fit.
After basic, where did you go?
Went to Camp Cody. Well, that's what I said was Camp Cody. What before was Camp Cody. Went from there to straight to Camp Dixie, New Jersey.
What was travel like on a troop train?
It wasn't bad.
How many soldiers would be in one car?
Well, of course, that depends solely on your cars. I don't know definitely. I should have known later, but I didn't at that time.
Were you allowed to stop at any of the Red Cross canteens?
We were allowed to stop in.
Yeah.
En route from your early training through no. They put us on through trains.
What'd you do at Camp Dix?
Well, most of the time I was in the office.
What were your duties there in the office?
That's from the clerk.
When did you go overseas?
We landed at La Havre,
At La Havre?
France.
What day?
I don't recall.
Do you recall the boat trip to France?
Boat trip through France?
The boat trip to France.
Oh, yes, that's it.
Anything happened on the boat?
Nothing very exciting.
Tell me about landing at Le Havre. What did you do that day when you landed?
We crawled out of the boat and out of the
Hey, Pat, you can get the pen.
ship. And I don't remember just what we got well, we went to Liverpool, England first, and then we went to Southampton, then we went from Southampton to the Havre. Well, we went over in a troop boat, and if you've ever been around the railroad and watched people load hogs and things like that, well, that was the boat trip from Southampton over to the Havre. We were in there just like cattle and animals, and no room, not room enough to lie down. Had anything happen?
How long did you stay at Le Havre?
We didn't stay there long. We were short of supplies and everything, and we were sent south in France. We didn't stay at the Havre, just made a landing, trains took us to South France.
What part of France?
Well, I think like town a dozen times. I can't think of the name right now, but we stayed there about 2 weeks and got our supplies. And we didn't, when we landed, we didn't have anything. So no guns, no ammunition, no food.
Ever spend time in the trenches?
No. I got up to Verdun, France, and night the armistice was signed.
At Verdun? Tell me about that night at Verdun.
That was a very, very happy night. I'd been on troop train all day, and we learned early in the afternoon that the armistice had been signed. So when we got into Verdun, why all orders had just been suspended. Instead of going into camp and going in orderly camp, we were just turned loose. But of course there hadn't been any fires in that out in the open in all during the period before, and that night, why, they just turned loose. They started fires wherever they chose, I think. And instead of being orderly and filing tents in order, it was just fire everywhere, anyway and everywhere. We were just turned loose.
What'd you do?
I just did like the other boys did. They found a place and put it in their little oak pup tent, and everybody was just upset. There's no order in anything. You could go where you chose to go. You could do whatever you chose to do. And there was a tent, of course, to have orders. We had guards and everything as usual, but it wasn't the orders that you would expect during the war. The boys, I didn't, but the boys started some fires that night, and those French people were so upset. They sprayed the Germans to see those fires and come on over again. However, it wasn't any experiment.
What did you do after the armistice was signed?
Armistice signed?
Yeah, did you spend time in France?
No, I found as quickly as it became orderly, I came home. I had some very, very nice officers to work with and under, and they asked me to go with them up in Germany, but I preferred to come home, so I came home.
Where did you get your discharge?
Fort Worth.
Fort Worth? And were you discharged in 1918 or 1919?
At night, and that's the 18. Made birthday, June the 20th, and then the 22nd in 19.
Did you go back to work for the railroad? What'd you do for them?
Went back on the top jobs at clerk, cashier and clerk in the office at home where I left.
There at
Custer City.
Custer City? How long did you work there?
For them?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I went back to work on July the 24th, 19, I guess it was. Quick as I could go back to work after that. And I went from there to Clinton. Worked in Clinton. I think 16 years, didn't we? In other words, we went there in 1948. What I did. Came over here.
How did the Depression affect you?
I did what?
The Depression in the 1930s affect you and your family?
Well, I never comment about it. I had a job, and that never lost a day's work. We were married, of course, and she taught 3 years school. I just went on and read as usual. It was not too much. Now, you're talking about what year?
1930 to 35. You know the big dust storms?
Big dust storm.
Yeah.
30 to 35.
Yeah, in those years.
I was cashier for the Frisco and the Rock Island Railroad in Clinton, Oklahoma, from the 31st of, in 1931 I went there. And I was in that all during the early portion of those dust storms. I was still in Custer City, commuting back and forth. However, I moved then down to Clinton and lived there 16 years.
How bad were the dust storms around Custer City and Clinton?
Just like they were everywhere else. You leave one, you buy more. However, out in western Oklahoma, further west than we are, out in the Panhandle area, it was much worse than it was where we lived. However, we had lots of dust and dirt, but the destruction of your soil was not nearly as bad in that area as it was further out. In, say, in the Panhandle, that area was just blown away. Of course, we suffered from the blowing sand and blowing dust and all like that.
What caused those dust storms?
Sir?
What caused those dust
I
storms?
won't comment. I don't know.
You ever heard of a dust storm called Black Sunday?
No, I have heard of it, but I know nothing about it.
What did you do during World War II?
World War II, I was at Clinton, chief clerk and cashier for the Frisco and Rock Island Railroad.
What are your duties as chief clerk?
Everything there is to do about the station. And that's in World War II.
Yes, sir.
From the day that the Japanese destroyed Honolulu, from that day till the Japanese surrendered, how long was that? 4 years and what?
41 through 45.
Okay. I worked every day, Sunday included, for the Frisco and the Rock Island Railroad in Clinton, Oklahoma.
Oh, you were still chief clerk at that time?
Yeah, I was cashier and chief clerk there at Clinton for the Frisco and the Rock Island. Now I had Frisco passenger business to take care of. I had Frisco freight business to look after. And for the financial end, see, that's what I mean. I had Rock Island passenger business. I had had the Rock Island freight business. I had the express company with that. And then we had these little companies that associate themselves with the railroad companies. In other words, I at that time was reporting to 7 different articles.
How did the war affect the railroad?
It put them on their feet for a while. In other words, the transportation was so great. And we just didn't have sometimes possibly enough equipment possibly to take care of the business, but all business ceased when the military was needed.
So did the military take over the trains, basically?
Well, I don't know, I never talk about that. The government controlled the railroad to an extent. Well, it didn't make any difference. If the government needed it, they took it. That's all.
What did you do when World War II ended? Is there a big celebration around Clinton? Wasn't a big celebration there.
No, not like I would anticipate.
Yeah. How long did you work for the railroad?
How long from the time I hired up till I quit? Hired that in January 1, 17. Worked my last day, June 30th, 19. What? I've been 61.
1961. Were you mainly a clerk for the railroad all those years? What else you do for the railroad?
Well, I came here in 1940, January
Look
40.
nice, Bob.
1948, I came here as a rate clerk in the traffic manager's office.
When was the conversion from the steam engine to the diesel engine?
Compared. I don't have, of course, I observed both of them as working, both of them, but I wouldn't have any specific idea of when the transfer was made.
Do you know what the advantage the diesel engine, what advantage does the diesel engine have over the steam engine?
You mean the diesel engine?
Yeah?
Well, I'm not mechanically inclined to know too much about the transfers, about the economic conditions and difference between one and the other. However, I would say that it expedited things considerably when they moved from one to the other. It expedited business.
What were your main duties here in Oklahoma City with the railroad?
Over there, I was here in Oklahoma City, came over here as a rate clerk.
I'm sorry?
Rate clerk,
Rate clerk.
checking freight rates.
Okay.
Then I made chief clerk.
When did you become chief clerk here in Oklahoma City?
Oh, actually, I came to 40, it's about 50. No, it wasn't because I left here at 50. Somewhere around 49.
You say you left here in 50?
No, I left here, let's see, it came in 48. Yeah, I left here on June 30th, 1951.
Where'd you go?
Enid.
Now, was this a voluntary transfer, or were you sent up there, or what?
Company transfer.
Company transfer. You go up there as chief clerk?
No, what is that? Traveling freight.
Traveling freight.
Traveling freight agent.
What were your duties up there?
Travel. Call on, see, that was my headquarters, but I traveled. Well, my headquarters was here. I worked under this office here, under the traffic manager here, and was traveled over the western half of Oklahoma.
And did you stay in Enid until you retired?
Yes, I retired. My home was in India, yes, and I retired exactly 10 years. My day I left here till the day I retired. Left here on June 30, 1951. Retired on June 30, 1961. Last 10 years or so.
Yeah. Did you enjoy your years with the railroad?
Very much.
What are some of your most memorable experiences with the railroad?
Oh, I wouldn't pick any specific. I enjoyed all of them.
Well, anything else you want to talk about? Anything about your childhood?
No, not necessarily. You know, really, I would say, for this one comment, that during that 10 years in England, I was looked after the, well, I can say that I shouldn't make remarks, but during wheat harvest, every year during wheat harvest, you always hear that there's not enough boxcars, and they're not moving stuff fast enough. Well, during that 10 years, I traveled with that stable and made the estimates for the wheat harvest for cars and so forth and so forth. And during wheat harvest time, I'd leave home, say, the latter part of May, about 25th of May, then was on the road all the time, looking after the boxcars and so forth. In order to see that they were properly distributed, if we could, and keep them down where there wouldn't be too much noise about why can't we get any cars or this and that. But during the 10 years in England, and each May, the last portion of May, I was in, except that I was retired.
Did you know your grandparents?
Sir?
Did you know your grandparents?
Have any grandparents?
Did you know them?
I know my grandfather, one.
Were either of your grandfathers in the Civil War?
Not the one of it.
Where did you meet your wife?
Custer City.
Custer City? And what year were you married?
Married 1920, 1908 was it? That was there when we were married. We were married August 18th, 1920.
1920. So this year you'll have your
65th.
65th anniversary this year. Pretty good. Ma'am, what's your name?
Ethel.
Ethel? What was your maiden name? Kaufman?
C-O-F-F-M-A-N.
I came to this part of the country, and he was from the north.
Yeah.
She's a Virginia and I'm a Kentucky.
When you married, I had a sister, yeah.
She taught 2 years of school, came out there to teach school. She went from 15 and
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
yes.